Previous presentation was excellent insofar as it teed up the regulated emissions market, so the Kyoto Protocol, the European Union ETS. I'm going to go in a different direction and talk about the voluntary carbon markets, which is a separate carbon market that really runs in parallel, but is not automatically linked to the regulated side. I've got quite a few slides, but I think that'll be of interest to people when they take the presentation away with them. There's a fair amount of data as well, which should be useful. So, as Amelia said, I head the voluntary carbon markets desk at MF Global. MF Global is a big brokerage. New York Stock Exchange listed. We turn over about $1 billion. Biggest in oil, biggest in foreign exchange. Energy is a very big commodity for us. Obviously, we need to keep growing like any business. So carbon credits is the new market. It's a new commodity. As we've seen demonstrated earlier, the market is worth about $100 billion. So it's not small, and it's growing all the time. So for a company like the one I work for, it's very important to get into this market and get a good leadership position. So you can see some wonderful stuff about MF Global there, how big and clever we are. Really, in essence, what I want to get across is the fact that we're global. We deal in global markets, and carbon, regulated or voluntary, is very much a global commodity. For example, we have offices in lots of different countries, over 3,000 people, and we're members of lots of exchanges. So it's easy for us to facilitate trading of these carbon credits in lots of different markets. So really, this is just a heads up of what I want to cover today. Talk about really what VERs are, the carbon credit, the voluntary carbon credit units. We'll look at retirement, some facts and figures on the market, some statistics in terms of size and methodologies. Voluntary credits are reasonably complicated insofar as standards are involved, different standards, different locations, different methodologies. Then when you look at pricing, there's factors such as vintages of credits that come into it as well. So these all affect the mix. Also, an insight into what it's like to do business in the voluntary carbon market, tips for sellers in the market, tips for buyers in the market, and really sort of best practice. And then we'll look at where the voluntary carbon market fits in terms of the bigger picture, the global carbon market. And then I've just got a few thoughts on the future, and then we'll take some questions at the end. If there's anything that people don't understand, or if I'm talking too fast or too quietly, please stop me and let me know. Okay? Apologies, I don't speak Spanish, so I hope you'll understand my English. So first up, let's just look at the definition of a voluntary market. In a voluntary carbon market, an entity, which could be a company, an individual, or another emitter, it volunteers to offset its carbon emissions by purchasing carbon allowances from a third party, who then takes this money and uses it for projects. So there's some key words there. Really, you get to see who the players are: companies, individuals, other emitters. And these companies and individuals are volunteering. So this is not a regulated market. They're doing this out of choice. A big motivational factor is CSR, corporate social responsibility. So every large company likes to show that it's doing its bit for the environment, that it's a green company. This is especially true for Spanish companies, American companies, British companies. As soon as one company in a sector shows off its green credentials, you can be pretty sure that the others will catch up. It's one of those races everyone has to be in once it's started. So this really demonstrates what the voluntary market is. So it's voluntary. People don't have to do it. People volunteer to do it. And they typically buy offset credits from third parties. Okay? And these projects where the offsets come from are in projects that reduce emissions that would otherwise go into the atmosphere. So that's somewhere to start from. Okay, so transacting VERs. As I said before, a VER is a verified emission reduction. It's the generic term for a voluntary carbon credit. Okay, and as we'll see later, there's different sub-levels, there's different standards that we can apply different unit names to. So we'll look at some VR transactions, the market participants, their motivations, some typical deal shapes in the market, and as I said, some tips for successful buying and selling of these credits. So, firstly, the main thing in dealing with VRs is it's really tough. VRs are not commoditized. A CER, for example, has got the UN rubber stamp on it. A CR is a CR. It doesn't matter really which country it came from, how old it is, what project methodology. It's got the UN stamp. It's fungible. It's good. In the voluntary market, again, because it's voluntary, people don't need to buy these things. So in the real world, people are really picky. Additionally, because these credits aren't commoditized, it's very difficult for speculative buyers to come in. You can't really hedge non-commoditized products. What happens if an Indian wind VR plus credit no one wants to buy? How do you offset that risk on your books? It's very difficult to do that. Indian wind projects, small Chinese hydro projects, they're similar, but they're not quite the same in the eyes of the buyer. So these credits are not commoditized, which makes them sophisticated and quite difficult to trade. Additionally, there are no guarantees. As I've said, there's no UN rubber stamp. What people might think is a good quality credit today might not be in 9 months' time. So again, there is a risk of buying credits that if you hold them on your book as a trader, you might not be able to sell. So that's all factored into pricing and into how the market is traded. It's very much hand to mouth, buyer to seller. People don't hold these credits that much. There's additional problems. There could be interference from third parties. For example, we had some Indian wind projects that the UN, the projects were CDM projects, but the UN decided to look into this company and their Indian wind project. So this was at the UN level, nothing to do with the voluntary market, but before the UN was happy to issue these as CERs from these credits, from this project, there was a 12-month delay. So a 12-month delay to issue CERs, which then impacts on the VRs from the same project. So that's a massive problem when you're dealing in contracts and timescales. And as I said before, people tend to buy these to sell them on or to retire them pretty quickly. 12 months is a lifetime. Additionally, there's problems with DOEs. These are the designated operation entities, the companies that typically verify CDM projects and also voluntary projects. As you're probably aware, 2 or 3 of these have been suspended in the past year or two. When a DOE gets suspended, they are prohibited from verifying any new projects. So again, another delay. So, dangers really for sellers and buyers in this market. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. One buyer, this is a very specific market, and one buyer might think that Brazilian biomass is the absolute best top quality. Brazilian biomass, VCS standard, 2008 vintage is the best you can get. Another seller might think that their Indian wind project or their Ecuador small hydro project is the best because it's gold standard, it's a different standard, it's a different location. So again, because this goes back to not being commoditized, there's differences in terms of quality. It's perceived quality. People think that one credit is better than another. So again, it's very hard to trade these things. It's very hard to speculate on the market, which leads to sort of certain pressures. There's a great deal of fashion in the voluntary carbon market. I'd argue that the majority of buyers in this market have kind of lost the original concept insofar as buying as many credits as they can afford to offset as many tons of carbon dioxide from going into the atmosphere. The market is very much now into fashion. Retail offset providers like to have a broad portfolio of credits with which to offer their clients. It's not enough to say we've got a gazillion tons of Brazilian landfill gas. They need to be able to show they have some Central American credits, some Asian credits, some Vietnamese credits, some African credits. So they get very picky. And more we're seeing the rise of charisma in projects. There has to be pretty photographs. So renewable energy is typically favoured because there's photographs of African children with cook stoves, which looks great for the brochures of the companies who buy these. A photograph of a Chinese cement factory is not as pretty. So therefore, the price of Chinese cement credits, even though they're as valid in terms of the environment, is a lot less. So we're getting fashion, we're getting charisma involved in the market, which again just makes it that much more complicated because fashions change. Legislative uncertainty. There are no rules governing this. It's all voluntary. The market that's sprung up, there's a lot of peer working together. We'll see the rise of registries and standards, but it's pretty much people feeling their way in this market. People agreeing that one standard is good, and if we all agree that that standard is good, then it's a good standard. But there's no higher body like the UN or a government saying, we've tested this standard, therefore it is good. And as we'll see, in America, there could be something special happening there, but the politicians seem to be having their own problems, especially since the Massachusetts by-election has skewed things for the Democrats. Finally, there's occasional bad press. I mean, everyone in the market, we've all seen this. Certainly in the UK, I'm not sure in Spain, but the UK, the press loves to go on and on about bad things. You know, we never celebrate good things. It's always climate change data that's proven that the Arctic glaciers won't melt as fast as we thought. And you know, as I was saying to some colleagues this morning, in the UK we've had a very, very cold winter. And people come up to me and say, global warming. Wow, look at this, it's freezing. And you want to sort of shake them and say it's really a question of global weirding. Climate change is real, and it's happening, but it doesn't mean it's all going to be 50 degrees centigrade every day, which unfortunately people seize on, you know, because global warming can only mean one thing. So all in all, just a snapshot there of it's a bit of a Wild West market at the moment. There's no real legislation, lots of different players, lots of different motivations. It's very difficult to get involved in this market, but equally it's a very valid market. And it's a lot of fun, if hard work. So let's look at a typical deal, for example. What happens when someone buys and sells VER credits? So in this scenario, and this is what I've done recently, we have the project developers. So these are the guys who have the project. In this example, it's an Indian wind project. So it's an industrial who owns, they've built a wind farm. And this is a CDM project, which is also delivering VERs. Okay, so the Indian wind project, they don't know who buyers are. They're an Indian company. Buyers are typically European, Australian, American. They don't have that network. All they know is how to build wind farms. So they approach an aggregator like Ernst & Young, for example. Ernst & Young, Pricewaterhouse, a lot of these companies act as kind of middlemen in terms of aggregating supply in the host country. So Ernst & Young in India have several offices. And they go around and they really push this product. If you've got a wind farm and you want to sell your credits, come to us. We'll do the selling for you. So that's the service they provide. Ernst & Young will try and sell these credits directly on the international market, or they'll use brokers like myself. Okay. The benefit of using a broker is we've got our own networks of buyers and sellers, so we can pretty much find a home for these credits. So in this scenario, a product developer went to the aggregator. Aggregator came to me. And I found a buyer, in this instance, a retail offset provider. For those of you who don't know, these are typically the largest buyers in the market at the moment. For people who want to offset their flights or the emissions from their car or their heating at home, typically on the individual level, people go to a retail offset company. For example, the Carbon Neutral Company, Climate Care, TerraPass. There's more and more of these companies around the world. These guys will typically sell credits to individuals or also companies by measuring your carbon footprint, then advising on how to reduce your carbon footprint, and lastly, selling you the offsets to make you, in effect, climate neutral, carbon neutral. So this retail offset provider is a big player in the market. They bought these credits. They will now add these credits into their portfolio with which to sell to their individual and corporate clients. Okay, and in this case, it was actually a taxi company in London bought these credits. They want to offset all their emissions from their taxi fleet, their black cab taxi fleet, which is quite cool. That's not the only scenario, though. Other ones include a seller goes to a buyer direct. Perhaps they've done business before. So in this case, the project developer would know the end user, the corporate, and just sell directly. Saves a lot of time. There's also been some auctions in the market. These don't tend to work very well. Really for the reason that these credits aren't commoditized. So it's very difficult. People are very specific. I'd say a lot of the auctions, and I'm a broker, so I don't like auctions. I'd rather people came to me, so I'm a bit biased. But I'd say probably 50% of auctions have failed to find buyers in the given time frame or at the set price. So mixed success for auctions in the market. But again, it's an evolving market. It's changing. So I'm sure we'll see more and more scenarios, more routes to market as we get on. Finally, there's a last point there, market speculators. We are seeing some of these. Again, it's very difficult for people to buy and trade these. Typically, people buy VRs because they have a buyer already lined up, so they're buying and just passing them on straight away. Speculators who go into the market and take a gamble on what they think will be popular or more valuable in the future. We're seeing a few of those, but it's still early days. So some general tips, and I've sort of segmented it for sellers and buyers. If you have a look, you'll see that a lot of the details are very similar on both sides, but equally some are quite different. If you're a seller, you want to make as much money as you can and get as fast a sale as possible so you get the cash. Really what that means is choosing the best standard at that time. As I said, it's a fashionable market, standards change. So you really want to make sure that when you get your credits, you're paying to have these verified to the most sellable standard. Okay. You also need to understand who the buyers are and how the market works typically. And I'd say, as a seller, you have to get all your paperwork in place. Buyers only want to deal with professional entities, and they want to make sure that what they're buying is fully above board and official. Similarly with buyers, buyers really need to make sure that they know exactly what they want. Again, there's a lot of factors in VERs: location, methodology, vintage, standard, etc., etc. Make sure you're buying what you feel your clients want or what you want yourself. Understand what's available, but also make sure you're buying exactly what you want. There's no point in buying more than you need, as much as it pains a broker to say that. We get paid commission on tons typically. But really specify what you want. There's no problem being specific in this market. And then you can see that the bottom half of both columns have similar issues for both buyers and sellers. Use experts, and no one is an expert in the market. Use brokers, use people like me. We know a lot more than typically buyers or sellers do. We can cut corners, save time, and increase revenue for both parties. Also, be realistic. Like any business transaction, don't expect $1 million for a ton. It's never going to happen. We've seen this in the past. People in New Zealand selling Kiwi VRs for $57 on eBay. You'll sell one. It's just a complete waste of time. Aim for repeat business. But really, just act in good faith. If you're going to start a negotiation, see it through. We've had problems on the market before. People have brought credits into the market, which people have liked, and then they've taken them back because the price hasn't been right, or they feel if they hold them another 2 months, the price might go up by a couple of euros. Really, that's not a good way to play. It's a small market. Word gets around. If you're a bad counterparty, people soon realise that actually it's not worth dealing with this guy because he's a time waster. So, like in any market, really, just be genuine. Typically, when people buy credits, it's to retire them. That is, after all, the rationale of buying voluntary credits, as we saw in the definition at the beginning. Here's an example. There are 3 registries in the voluntary carbon market at present: Market, Caisse de Dépôt, and APX in California. This is the market registry proposal for retiring credits. They're all pretty similar, but just to run you through it, typically a seller submits all the documents to the registry. The registry then checks that all the documents are in order. So there's a verification certificate, for example, a validation report. There is proof that the stated number of emissions that occurred did actually occur at that location at that time. It's then the registry who issues the VCU. So this is an example of the VCS registry. So the registry will issue the VCS. These are the voluntary carbon units, which come from the VCS organisation. So the registry issues these credits to the seller, puts them into the seller's holding account. At the same time, the registry then notifies the VCS registry, so the governing body of the VCS standard. So they have a meta-registry, which tracks every credit. The seller then gets hold of these credits in the holding account. They then transfer them to the buyer's account. And if the buyer wishes to retire them, they put them into the retirement account. The purpose of registries is very important. And 2009 was really the year of the registry. In previous years, the voluntary market had some bad press. It's not transparent. There's no guarantees. There's no UN standards. One way of getting around this is by being transparent, is by being open. So in the voluntary market, we've got these registries now, which are very similar to the UN CDM registries. So people can now track credits. So if I've bought credits from someone's project, I can now demonstrate to the world that I've bought X number of credits from this project. This project has been verified by a DNV, a TÜV Süd, a TÜV Nord, one of these internationally respected verifying companies, and I own full title to those. If I want to retire them, again, I can show the world that I've retired them because it's on a transparent registry. Anyone can go to Market, APX, Caisse de Dépôt, and have a look. So that's a very important point to make. And And really, the purpose of registries, it gets away from delivery risk, which is something we've always had. I'm buying these credits. Do they really exist? I'm buying 100,000 tonnes. How do I know the seller hasn't sold those 100,000 tonnes to 5 different people? Whereas with the documents, there's one set of documents. They're in this global registry. Everyone can see them. I own those credits. So I've taken that 100,000 tonnes out of the market. Okay. Final point, very interesting. Despite the fact that the voluntary market should be about offsetting and retiring credits, typically less than 10% of all issued VERs to date have been retired. So it makes you wonder what people are doing with the other 90%. So really that's the first part of the presentation. We've seen who's in the market, how deals are done, tips, what to look out for. The second part I'm going to go into now is just a bunch of slides showing some data. Okay, which is quite useful. So we get a closer understanding of what a project is and what's selling. So let's break down the voluntary market by North America and by the international market. It's just simpler that way. North America really came into this market later than Europe, later than Australia. They've been quite isolated in what they're doing, but now they seem to be sort of coming together. I think America will always have their own rules. But there is a growing market in America. But for the sake of clarity, it's very different over there. So I've sort of cut it into two. And a lot of these slides you'll see have come from our friends at New Energy Finance, who have peerless in terms of data in the voluntary market. They are the best. So looking here, we've got North America. This is all data from January to September last year, so it's not full year data. That's not in yet. So North American 09 OTC market, so over-the-counter credits. Okay. So as we can see in the American market, the most popular project type is landfill gas. No surprise, every municipality, every city, every town has a waste dump. Americans waste a lot of food, a lot of organic matter. So they've been doing this in the States for a long time. They're now cottoning on and realise that they can do voluntary projects, capturing methane from landfill sites and either flaring it, so the methane becomes carbon dioxide, which is less harmful for the atmosphere, or actually using that methane into a biogas and using it to generate electricity. Okay, so that's half of the market in that time period. Forestry is also very big. Someone made a point to me recently that Americans love forest, and they identify with forestry a lot more than Europeans. And I think the reason is, in Europe, we don't tend to have a lot of forest. Because we've been living in this space for a long time, we've chopped most of it down. So there's less of a kinship between Europeans and forestry, I'd propose, than in America, where it's a vast country and there's still a huge amount of forestry. You could also say we're a bit more sophisticated and we feel that you should be doing other things and not just looking at trees. And then you've got some other methodologies. But really the lion's share is landfill gas and forestry in America. Okay. Different picture in the international market. Fuel switching is very big. A facility so basically what this is saying is international buyers of VERs are typically buying fuel switch projects, industrial gas projects, and renewable energy, wind and run-of-river hydro. Fuel switching will be, say, a cement factory in India. It used to burn tyres. It used to burn filthy fuel, made a lot of pollution. Those companies are now burning natural gas, which is a lot cleaner. So that's an example of a fuel switch project. Because the combustions from that facility are a lot less than they had been, it's therefore deemed worthy of a project. It's additional. So European international buyers prefer fuel switching, industrial gas, and a lot of renewable energy. Again, like all statistics, some of these are skewed insofar as industrial projects, industrial gas, fuel switching projects are by definition big. It's an enormous cement factory. It's an enormous power facility. I'd say in terms of actual project numbers, renewable energy is far and away the most popular internationally, whereas in America it's not. It's very much landfill gas. And then just a heads up, I won't go through this. You can see this when you get the handouts. But just an example of some of the standards. We're looking at standards now in terms of project types. So CAR, REGI, VCS, VR+, CCB, these are all different standards in the market. It's a constantly growing list. It's an evolving list. New methodologies come out, new standards come out to match those methodologies. Again, people feel free to buy what they want. There's no regulation. Typically, the strongest standards survive. So you can look at those in your in your leisure, but just to give you a snapshot of an example of the different standards involved in our market. Who's to say which one is better than the next? So now we're going to do the same exercise, but look at standards. So North America first, then international. So what do North American buyers like to buy in terms of VRs? They like CAR. It's an American standard. They like ACR, another American standard. They like CCX, another American. Americans like buying American. That's really the point here. They're quite parochial, which is not a bad thing. There's no reason why an international standard can't do projects in America. It's just they have to work a bit harder. And as we'll see in the next presentation, the VCS is a very good standard, and they've worked very hard to, I'd say, reinvent themselves as an American standard. They used to work out of the IETA office in Geneva. They're now Washington. So they're telling the Americans that we're here, trust us, we're an American standard. So really, Americans buy American. International buyers, what do we buy in Europe? VCS. We love it. That is the bread and butter standard. It's an excellent standard. It typically replicates CDM projects, so the hard work's already been done. If it's CDM, it's normally pretty good. It's normally pretty stringent and valid. Social carbon is a layer that you can apply to VCS, and the gold standard as well, based in Switzerland. The gold standard is coming from the World Wildlife Fund. They like to think that they have the highest level of integrity with their credits. They build in sustainability, social development in every project they do. On the downside, they have a very narrow range of project types that they allow to be gold standard. So really just a snapshot, but it's showing you, again, international buyers, American buyers, very different preferences, very different perceptions in the market. And as a broker in the international market, we have to be aware of all of this. Who buys what? Who sells what? Okay, and just to give you some volumes. Again, this is estimates. We have 05 to 08. That's hard data. 2009, again, New Energy Finance have estimated. I've done my own sums in the background, and if you look at the optimistic target, I've kind of, this is my sort of best guess, and the data will come out probably in April or so. But where you see 47 million tonnes of OTC volume traded, I reckon that's more like 40 million tonnes. It's been a bad year, 2009. CCX has gone up. I see that about 45 million tonnes. So overall, I'm seeing about 86 million tonnes traded in the market in 2009. If you compare that to 2008, last year, 123 million, you can see we've really sort of come off a cliff. We've been growing every year in terms of volumes of tonnes traded, and it's just fallen off. Simple reason, global recession, certainly in the developed countries, the countries that buy these credits, they're voluntary credits. If you don't have the cash, you just don't buy them. Compare that to the regulated market. The European Union says if you're a German power producer, you have to meet targets every year or there's big penalties. So that market keeps going on, and that market's grown by about 5% this year, irrespective of the global recession. But in the voluntary market, it's come off a cliff. But no surprise. It doesn't mean the voluntary market's failed or there's less interest. Really, in real terms, it means that companies who decided to offset for the first time in 2009 deferred that decision by a year. We'll come back in 2010 when we've got some more cash, but we're still committed to doing this. So growth has slowed, but my prediction is we'll see that growth level back on its upward trajectory starting this year. Okay, so now let's look at pricing. And as you can see from the cartoon, that's gone down as well. It's very much become a buyer's market. Demand has dropped quite a bit, as I've explained, and when you have that, prices go through the floor. So, again, just a bit of background. This is on the CCX. The CCX is interesting. It's exchange-traded carbon in America, but it's a very small market. CCX is the standard. It's also the exchange. And so we like to use as a counterpoint for the greater, the OTC market, the more interesting market, in my opinion. As we can see from 2003, very, very small volumes and very low prices. As we had a head of steam in the voluntary market, 2007, 2008, we've seen volumes and prices go up. They seem to have peaked, and they've come down again in 2009 for the same reasons. Okay, people aren't buying these credits. And prices as well. If you look at the price of their credits are called CFIs. A 2010 CFI is 10 cents at the moment. So contrast that to $6 year and a half ago. It's really almost disappeared. On the positive side, there is a small amount of OTC trading of these credits, separate to the exchange, and those credits are trading for about 75, 80 cents. So what that demonstrates is people will pay more if they can really choose their project. When you trade on exchange, you're just buying, I want 10,000 tons. Don't know where it comes from, it's 10,000 tons. When you're trading OTC, like typically the rest of the voluntary market, you can specify, I want 10,000 tons from a project in this country, in that methodology, in this year. I'll pay more for that. So we're seeing that change even on CCX credits. And really the other side of the coin, on the OTC, the non-CCX traded market, an example of prices, again, this is first 9 months of 2009. Gold standard premium pricing. I should say these are all in US dollars. CCAR, these are the CRT, the car credits, $6.80. VCS averaging about $3. They've been as high as $7. At the moment, people pay $5, $6 for some American VCU credits. CCX $1.40. As I said, it's about 10 cents now. These are averages. So again, you can see the differential in terms of standard and how buyers apply different values to projects with different standards. And really remember that the underlying is 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, whether it's a gold standard ton, a VCS ton, a CCX ton. It's the same physical measurement. People just pay different preferences for different standards. Okay, so how do we do business in this market? How do we attract business? As I said, it's an international market. It's not enormous. We've had a bad year in 2009. It's growing, but it's small. How do we go out and attract business? Well, you've got to be imaginative. There's a growing industry. There's a growing information industry in the carbon markets for both voluntary and regulated emissions. Reuters, Bloomberg, New Energy Finance, who've just been bought by Bloomberg recently. Carbon finance. There's lots of industries now who disseminate information. So for an active broker like myself, I will give, for example, New Energy Finance details every month of the trades we've done. And they'll speak to other people in the market, and they collate all that data, which is how they can do those charts that we've seen earlier. My route to market is obviously through business contacts, through counterparties we've worked with before, but also working smart. This is my Bloomberg page. So this is a live page. And you can see, for example, just different projects, different size. This is real. So you can see what people are paying, the bid-offer spread in the market at the moment. This is from about a week ago. Okay, so that's one way I interface with clients, on a Bloomberg page. Okay. Another way, this is a pricing matrix I put in the Carbon Finance publication, which is a hard copy printed once a month, and that goes out. And they've chosen me for my VR prices. And again, real data. This is real pricing that we've transacted, that we've seen in the market. So again, it's all about getting information into the market, and it helps me to provide some light into this market, and the same way that other brokers might do, other traders do. The worst you can have in a market is lack of information. People then just sit on their hands and do nothing. So the more information we can all provide in the market, the more liquid it becomes. It's also a nice bit of advertising promotion, if I say so myself. Okay. Finally, another thing that we do is regular market reports. So if you look at the one on the right, the Voluntary Carbon Market Summary, that's something that I write every week, and I launch on the Reuters Interactive site. And I'd urge everyone to look at that site. It's free to register. There's about 20,000 users. It's, for my money, the best market in the world in terms of information on the carbon markets. I write this, I post it there. I also send it out to clients. If anybody here doesn't receive it, would like to, see me afterwards, and I'll add you to the distribution list. But that's regarded as pretty much the best summary in the market, even if I say so myself, because we've been doing it for a long time. As you can see at the top, there's statistics. So you can see the different projects, standards, how many tons have been traded in the past week, how many tons have been issued. We get a lot of people coming to us now saying, can you show our data off, because you've got the readership. So it's a good way for them to promote themselves. First couple of paragraphs, normally pricing. Again, it's a pretty opaque market. So if I can tell people what's traded that week, what pricing levels are, there's an interest. Additionally, we have companies who pay us for our data, for our pricing data, which they use for their own clients to value their portfolios. On the left-hand side, the US Carbon Markets Weekly, your right-hand side. Again, it's a very similar offering, but it really focuses on the American markets. As we've seen, it's pretty parochial over there. It's been a little bit slower than the international market, so we try and keep it a little bit separate. Same look and feel, same information, market statistics, tons traded, volumes issued, pricing, some snapshots in terms of legislation, what's happening in the Senate, for example. So, again, that's a good route to market for a company like mine. And other people have their own ways of doing it. But really, you have to get your message out there. It's a small market, but it's a global market. And so you have to do whatever you can. I have a team of people. We have a big office in India, so I have someone who originates projects for me there. I have a guy in Singapore who kind of runs Asia-Pacific for me, puts deals together. As a lady I work with in New York, she helps me out over there. I've got a guy in London. So really, not a big team, but people in strategic places all around the world, originating credits from one side of the world, bringing them to me for my buyers in Europe or in America, typically. Okay, so I like that picture. You could apply it to so many things, I think. Let's look at the context, really. I've spent a fair bit of time talking about the voluntary market and how it's good and worthy and growing and interesting and downright groovy. But really, let's have a look. Again, this is 07-08 data. But look at the top lines. The total voluntary market size in 2008, 123 million tons. Scroll down, look at total regulated markets, 4 billion tons. Okay. It's a very small piece of the global carbon market jigsaw at the moment, but it's growing. 2007, the voluntary markets were about 2%, 2.2% of the total global transacted carbon markets. In 2008, that grew to 3%. Okay, small but growing. 2009, again, the data's not in, but my estimate is we've probably gone down to about 1%, because, again, it's been a bad year. We'll bounce back. We'll grow again. But you can see, really, in terms of context, that the voluntary market is a small piece of the pie. Okay. So, the future. Okay. Are we optimists or are we pessimists? Is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? No one knows. It's really a personal feeling. Likely scenarios. What could happen in this year and future years? A lot of things. My personal view is I think the markets will bounce back in the voluntary sector. I think we'll see this growth trend reoccurring probably from the second half of this year. We've already seen a lot more buying demand, albeit in small sizes. But in this year, September, October, November last year were very, very quiet in the market. So I think people, as the global recession finally shakes itself out, which will probably still take a few months, we'll see buyers return to the market. Naturally, there'll be a continued evolution of standards and market transparency. As I said, in 2009, registries and registry trading really shook up the market, and it was a real breath of fresh air. With registries, you get this transparency. With transparency, you get trust. With trust, you get liquidity. Suddenly people trust that the credits they've bought are genuine, and they do own them, and so then other people buy them. And it just goes round and round, which is good news. The elephant in the room, US legislation. If the Americans have a federal market, which they will do at some stage, I believe, that will be like the European Union ETS. Estimates will be, it'll be about 3 times the size of the ETS, so within a few years it'll be a $300 billion market, in addition to Kyoto, Europe, etc. That's pretty big. How that affects us in the voluntary market is, even if the legislators agree in 2010, which is probably a 50-50 now, because of what's happening in Washington, but if there is a federal scheme, it'll probably start in 2013, 2015, something like that. You need a reasonable amount of time to scale up to these. They have to measure every facility. They have to have a benchmark of which companies and factories they'll include in the market. So that takes time, as it did in the European Union. The value to the voluntary market is, once the legislators give the green light, there will definitely be a federal cap-and-trade scheme in America by January 1st, 2015. All of a sudden, in the voluntary market, people are buying credits because the Americans are going to have to use voluntary credits for use in the scheme. There'll be auctioning of credits, like in Europe, like EUAs, but additionally, they've already green-lighted, in theory, the usage of certain credits. So at the moment, there's a lot of jostling in America. VCS, Gold Standard, ACR, people putting their hands up, use us. We're a great standard. For the American federal scheme, allow our credits to be involved. As soon as legislation says, okay, VCS is in, ACR is in, CRT credits are in, you will see a massive amount of buying because people just buy these credits and hold on to them for future use in this market. As I said, we've seen Boxer Kerry, we've seen the Congress draft, Waxman-Markey. None of these things actually really exist. They're not enacted, even if Congress has passed them. But they all seem to be sharing the same sort of ideas. And if that is carried through to the legislation in the States, suddenly people will be buying VCUs like they're going out of fashion. They'll be buying CRTs like there's no tomorrow. So these are voluntary credits. This is great. This pre-compliance market will be a big boost for us. Other issues, the rise of RED, forestry products, avoided deforestation and forestry. We've already seen a few already. The VCS have kind of led the way in terms of a defined methodology. So we'll see a lot more people buying forestry projects, I think. Obviously, there'll be more innovation of new project methodologies. In Singapore, for example, which is classified as a developing country by the UN for some. There's a few countries that slip between the cracks. Singapore, Korea, to my mind, first world countries. But you can have projects. You can have CDM projects and also VRs from these countries. Singapore, they're looking at energy efficiency in buildings. So double glazing, more efficient air conditioning. These are all valid of credits and examples of innovation in the market in terms of what next. How else can we save carbon dioxide from going into the atmosphere? I think we'll also see more forward trading. Because it's still quite a young market, trades done to date are typically spot. So issued tons, I've got 100,000 tons, here's the paperwork to prove it, I'll sell them to you, you now have 100,000 tons. As we know, in more mature markets, we've got options, we've got futures and forwards. I'll buy those credits from you that you're going to develop in 2011 and 12, and I'll give you some money now, but then I own those credits. Then I have an option to buy 2013, 2014. We're going to see more sophisticated trading types come through. On the CCX, we'll see some more OTC growth, as we've seen at the moment. People are paying 75 cents as opposed to 10 cents. US offsets to dominate growth. That will be the market. And I think a real reason is this green tech that President Obama keeps going on about. Every country wants to get in on this. The Danes are brilliant at building wind turbines. The Germans, despite having a dreadful climate, are world leaders in solar panels because of the feed-in tariff given by their government. So every country wants to be number one and start exporting wind turbines, solar panels, exporting know-how and expertise. And if you're a country that can do this, you'll stand to make a lot of money. This is a very big future industry, especially as we're seeing typical first-world industries like car making going to low-cost countries, India, China, for example. So this is a new investment sector for most of the world. So really, those are my scenarios. That's what I see happening in the future. Time will tell. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, Grattan. And I would like to start with this question and answers with a reflection on although we say that the voluntary market is small, we are saying that 100 million tons are being abated. That is mostly 25% of the total emissions of yearly that we have in Spain. Okay, so we are thinking on if we are 40 million here in Spain, 10 million equivalent people will be abating their emissions. 10 million people. If we think on the Pareto rule applied to wealth, now how many people? Maybe 20% of the total population of the world will give 80% of the wealthiness. Now, so if we are able to get these people abate their emissions, there will be a great market. Even a regulatory market is still in place, no? So there is, I believe there's potential also, even if we have an international agreement for voluntary carbon markets. Okay, so what I feel that one of the key markets, I will ask you if you think that labeling on products and services could be one of the key elements of drivers in the voluntary carbon markets to being able to abate emissions associated with products rather than corporate levels in the companies, being able to, the buyer, the final buyer of a good or service, being able to assess whether this they want really a carbon neutral or zero emissions or whatever label that you want to use. And also I would like to ask you whether this DREFRA in the UK, who is working in a leading regulation on labeling, and maybe that we will have a standard here in Spain in the future, how this is working and how is the perception on the final user?
Okay. Well, to answer the first question, I mean, I think we're seeing this already in terms of labelling of products. People want to buy their baked beans in the UK, and they want to make sure that the baked beans are low carbon. Now, people have just got onto this, and people like it. And I can't see people stepping off this interest at a unitary level. You know, if I buy some sausages, are they local, or have they been flown in from Brazil? You know, thereby incurring emissions. There's big debates about this in the UK. I'm sure in other countries as well. Spanish strawberries. Why don't we have English strawberries, damn it? You know, but people want strawberries in the winter, and we can't grow them in the UK. So we have issues, and there seems to be, certainly at the individual level now, people making those decisions, making those selections based on carbon labelling, which I think the EU is going to start rolling out. So when you buy your tomato ketchup, you'll find out the carbon footprint of that. At the moment, it's voluntary, but more and more people are doing this. So I think from the unitary level, people are showing an interest in this. From a step up, from the corporate level, the business level, absolutely. You know, people. This is the nature of the voluntary offset market. Companies are deciding voluntarily to offset their emissions. As I said, you know, a taxi company, television companies, you name it. You know, Google, Yahoo. These guys all offset, and you know they're making choices about where to buy products, but they want to be associated. I'm dealing with a company at the moment. It's a European utility, and what they want to do when they supply gas to their clients, to domestic users, they want to sell the gas as carbon neutral. So every therm of gas that their clients will burn to heat their houses, the gas company will already have offset by buying voluntary credits. And so they hope to appeal to their clients, you know, buy gas from us, because not only is it great gas and good price, but it's also greener because, A, gas is greener than coal and oil, but also we've gone the extra yard as a company, and we've offset all those emissions by buying voluntary credit products. So there is a market now for companies. And as I said at the beginning, once, you know, a company in a sector decides to build green products or have greener processes, then typically the rest follow, or else they look bad in comparison. You know.
Any questions from the...
Actually, just before Ava asks the question, I didn't answer Amelia's second question about DEFRA. In the UK, DEFRA is the governmental body responsible for climate change. And they've come up with a voluntary carbon... They've come up with a scheme, a stamp of approval for what they think should be used as voluntary carbon credits. And basically, in my opinion, they've ballsed up. They've taken the lazy angle insofar as... I think, to be fair to them, they didn't want to say, we recommend that VCS is good and gold standard is good, but the other standards are bad. To avoid getting into that argument, what they've said is, for the moment of time, we reckon if you're a company selling offset credits, VERs, we, the government, recommend that they should be CERs or EUAs only. So, and they've given this sort of kite mark that companies can use to say that they only sell government-approved credits. Really, it's neither here nor there. Most of the retail offset providers have decided not to even subscribe to that scheme and have that kite mark because they actually know more than the government in this respect. The government will get round to seeing sense at some stage, but I think they've got so much to do, they don't want to get mired in the arguments over one standard better than another standard, etc. So it's a funny situation, but people have pretty much ignored what the government have said.
I see.
Okay, that works. Thank you, Grattan, for your conference. I found it very interesting. Maybe my question is pretty basic because I'm not quite an expert on this, but you've told that there are some companies telling other companies what the carbon footprint is in case they want to offset into the voluntary markets. Are these companies audited externally so that these carbon footprints results can be trusted in a way, or is it a question of faith that we believe the results?
It's kind of a bit of both. I mean, in terms of the credits, the credits are verified by third parties. There's no question about that. The credits in the real world typically come from CDM projects as well. So it's the same wind farm, for example. It's just a timing period when the credit was a VR to when it was a CER. But in terms of the carbon footprints and the measurements that retail offset providers use to tell a company what their carbon output is, there's no agreed formulation for doing this. There's basically two ways of doing it. It's been boiled down to about two different methodologies. And certain companies use A, certain companies use B. They all sort of say that it's been verified independently. But it's just a question of, for example, flights, aviation. When you're offsetting your aviation emissions, because the emissions take place in the upper atmosphere, it's more harmful to the environment, okay, because you're at 35,000 feet. Now, one carbon footprint calculator will say, doesn't matter, it's just the same. A ton up there is a ton down here, okay? And the other calculator will say, actually, it's 3 times as bad. So if your aviation emissions, we'll triple it, okay? And that's really one of the main differences. But at the end of the day, there's nothing stopping a buyer from thinking, well, you as a company, you have, I think, quite a low calculator for aviations. So I'll personally just buy more of your credits.
There was another question there.
Hello, thank you for your speech, for your conference, very interesting. I was wondering, only 10% of the carbon credits are used to offset, the voluntary carbon credits are used to offset. There is no speculation in the market, or very little. So there is 90% of the credits that are not being used nor to offset or to speculate with them. So I guess that means that primary sellers are not managing to sell 90% of the credits.
I mean, good point. There is, certainly from 2009, there's been a lot of stock lying idle, and that's why we've seen prices go down. Whereas before, people would rather cut their legs off than sell below $5. Now, we're getting phone calls, 50 cents, $1 for certain old, ugly sort of credits. Yeah. So there is a certain amount of that. There is some speculation, though, going on. Certainly in America, we have credits like CRT credits, because, again, as I said, the common perception is CRTs, maybe VCUs, will be eligible for this American scheme as and when that ever starts. So people are buying these and just kind of holding on to them because they feel it might be worth their while to do so. So there is a bit of speculation. But typically there isn't that much because, again, fashions change. There's no guarantee what you buy today will be sellable tomorrow. So it's an interesting anomaly. 90%, okay, there's a lot of stock and there's a bit of speculation. But I think it also highlights some of the inefficiencies. People have had credits issued in the past. To put these on a registry costs them a bit of money. So they might think, well, I won't bother until I have a buyer lined up, then it's worth my while. And I think that's the mindset going through, typically Indian sellers, Chinese sellers. Really, is there any point in getting these things put on a registry if I don't have a buyer? So I think when demand picks up, we'll see that 10% increase by quite a bit.
Thank you. Another question there?
Yeah.
Do you think this reflects growing awareness by companies and in the ultimate place from customers that they want to be green, but at the same time they want to ensure that the population where these projects take place also grows sustainably?
Are you from the gold standard? There's always one from the gold standard in every corner. Just tell me how wonderful our credits are again.
No, but I think since it's a market, right, this reflects higher awareness and therefore a higher willingness to pay for those credits. So is this your opinion?
Well, absolutely, but again, it's preferences. So people perceive that gold standard is better than VCS or CRT, for example. What we see in the market, historically gold standard, because they've been so narrow in terms of projects that they allow to become gold standard. And for a project to get gold standard credits, it's a much longer process as well than for VCS, for example. So that has an impact. Some people, even if the project was probably good enough to be gold standard or to meet the gold standard rules, they might have wanted the cash. So they might have gone for a quicker standard just to get the $5 as opposed to the $9. But yes, I think it's a fair point. I think the gold standard's got a very good reputation. It's certainly a very good quality credit, that's for sure. And some people who buy those credits buy it because they believe that A, they're the most expensive, so that's got to be a good signal. But B, they are the most stringent in terms of criteria. So if they're going to voluntarily offset, they might as well buy what they perceive to be the very best. And that's what we see in the market. Typically, trades of gold standard credits, though, are smaller. If you're a company and you're offsetting your office and maybe your staff's emissions, it could be 5,000 tons, 10,000 tons, for example. So we see smaller, but people, if you're buying small, an extra few dollars doesn't really make that much difference typically.
No.
Well, my question is complementary to the one she asked before. This is about the controls on the selling side. Imagine I have this fantastic project in Spain that I'm going to reduce the emissions by so many tons.
These international verification companies. So you'd get them to come in. They then scrutinise your paperwork, do their own measurements and calculations, and if they felt it was correct, then they would certify that as being correct to the given standard.
Another question there.
Do you think that the figure market has to learn from the voluntary market?
Yeah, I think it does, and I think that's always been the case. The voluntary market is a lot older than Kyoto. VRs have been around a lot longer than CRs. It's just been a lot more low-key. The Carbon Neutral Company, for example, one of these retail offset providers, was founded in 1997. So, they've been trading tons for a while for their customers. Kyoto started recently. EU ETS started 2005. But you're absolutely right, and I think there is a lot that the voluntary market can teach the regulated market, even though it's much smaller. For example, in terms of project methodologies. We see a lot of small projects. To become a CDM project and have CERs, you need to be a certain size because, remember, you've got to pay the verifiers in the same way with the voluntary market. You also have to pay a levy to the UN. So for small projects, it's just not worth becoming CRs, really. It's a lot of hassle, a lot of expense. So typically small projects go down the VCM route, the voluntary carbon markets route, because of cost. But also it's a lot less expensive to develop new methodologies. So what you see in practical terms are the voluntary carbon market innovating new types of projects which are then replicated and upscaled in the CDM. Solar stove cookers, for example, that sort of technology. We see get trialled in the voluntary market where it's small and cheaper, and then replicated on larger scales. For example, programmatic CDM, as Ismail was saying earlier. Light bulb changes, more efficient wood-burning stoves for villages, that sort of technology. So there is a definite role that is being played by the VCM leading into the regulated market. Additionally, some people say CERs, because they have that UN rubber stamp, they are therefore better than a VER. And that's just not the case. I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot of junk in the CDM, a lot of low-hanging fruit, HFCs, which really, in my opinion, shouldn't be given full value for credits. Voluntary credits are just as robust, typically, if not more so, than the CR equivalent.
There's maybe we'll take that final question because we are a little bit late on the schedule. But
thank you very much. I wanted to ask about additionality in VERs, as well as whether there's any sort of control over the project's effects on communities. Thank you.
Additionality is very important in the voluntary market, as it is in the CDM, and in fact it's a requirement. Typically, the majority of credits, certainly the slides I was showing, the international side, those VCS projects are typically pre-CDM. So it's the same wind farm, it's the same biomethane project from a CDM project, so it's already past additionality. In terms of do people want additionality, insofar as do people want the project, to make sure the project they're buying credits from wouldn't have happened unless that project knew it was getting money to sell credits, financial additionality. I think that's very strong as well. And the proof of that is people choosing certain standards over other standards. I mean, in the past, we've had some pretty joke standards in the voluntary market and pretty rubbish credits. The market is moving towards the better quality end, in the same way that we're seeing registry, transparency, transactions. People want to make sure, even if it's voluntary, they want to make sure that what they're buying and what they're putting in their corporate brochure, for example, stands up to the test. And so is additional, is genuine, is real.
Okay, thank you all. You have another...
Sorry, I missed your second question. Can you repeat the second question? Just shout it out.
Cheers, sorry. I wanted to know whether there's any control and any consultation with the actual communities that bear the brunt of the project. Thank you.
Typically there are, and typically that's a reflection of the standard again. So with gold standard, in the same way, gold standard CRs and VRs, it's the same. There has to be stakeholder consultation. It has to be documented. If they're building a small hydro facility, for example, there has to be evidence that the local community has been notified of this. They've had their views expressed. There's been sort of evidence of this. Similarly, with VCS projects, it's good practice to make sure that there's been consultation processes involved. Gold Standard, going back to that, is very keen on sustainable development and stakeholder values as well in the projects. So for those standards, and as I said before, going into that quality now, it's very important that this happens.
Thank you. Well, Grattan, for your approach to voluntary carbon markets. We will finalize this presentation, and what we will do, we will have a coffee break. Our schedule was to get back at 12. Maybe we'll take some minutes. Let us say that we will get back at 10 minutes past 12 and take some time from the coffee or to recover the schedule. Thank you.